It's the Bleav in Texans podcast brought to you by FanDuel, where right now on FanDuel, the Texans are favored to win the AFC South at plus 155. Jaguars second at plus 190, followed by the Colts and the Titans. Sounds about right. The Jaguars had a very quiet free agency period. They're loading up on future compensatory draft picks. So it really all comes down to a combination of just Trevor Lawrence continue on what he started to do in the second half of last season, and does the Jaguars GM James Gladstone actually know what he's doing when it comes to the draft? We'll find out. But at FanDuel right now, plus 155 for the Texans to win the AFC South. I want to take a little trip through some of the anonymous scout quotes from Bob McGinn over at Go Long TD. And I do all of this with a grain of salt, but I trust that Bob McGinn is getting these from bona fide scouts in the NFL. But as we know, scouts are wrong much of the time. If we go back to this series back in 2023, this is what one anonymous scout had to say about Will Anderson. I want to read this just so we just keep your frame of reference intact when we read some of the positives and some of the negatives about some of these guys that have been mocked to the Texans pretty heavily. Here's what this anonymous scout said about Will Anderson. I don't see much upside there. I thought he was a momentum rusher. He looked fantastic on twists and stunts and loops where he can get going. But to say he's just going to straight edge rush and beat offensive tackles of NFL caliber, I think he's going to get blocked. Is he Chase Young, Joey Bosa, Myles Garrett? No. Clay Matthews had more twitching quickness than him. What was Clay, 18 or 20? Yet, that's the guys we're comparing him to. Yet, he's going to go third or fourth. Terrible draft. All right. He's done pretty well for himself. I'd say this year he was second to pretty much Myles Garrett and Myles Garrett alone. So I went over to Mock Draft Database and just found the guys who have been most often mocked to the Texans. Spoiler alert, there's a whole bunch of beef here. Interior defensive linemen and offensive linemen, as we would expect, except that now I do think the Texans are in a best player available situation, much more so than they were a few weeks ago before they made all of these additions. An edge rusher wouldn't surprise me completely, but this seems to make sense with the way the draft is falling. Kadyn Proctor. Let's get started off with the big fella out of Alabama. And Alabama does not have an awesome track record when it comes to offensive tackles. But I try not to judge guys by the logo on their helmet. Let's just look at these guys. But he's a guy that would be a top 10 pick based on just his measurables, his size, all of these things, if there weren't some other questions about him. This anonymous scout from Bob McGinn over at Go Long TD says this: light on his feet, he can bend, he can move people, he can anchor. Talent-wise, there's no question who this kid is, but he has had weight issues over his career. The intelligence is not great. At the end of the day, O-linemen are big, smart, and tough are the guys that play. The guys that are super talented and maybe not that smart and have weight issues and the work ethic doesn't match the talent are the ones you worry about. He's how you want to draw them up physically, but it gives you a little pause with who he is. In terms of who he is physically, he's a large human being. He struggles to keep his weight to 350, but Alabama, as John Harris told us on this podcast a couple weeks ago, had a good incentive program for him, which was if you keep your weight down, we'll use you as a receiver, which is cool, I suppose. I feel like you'd like to maybe just have a guy keep his weight down for the sake of keeping his weight down. And I think you also look at him as a guy that athletically might play guard a lot better than he played tackle. The Texans have had him in on a top 30 visit. This strikes me as the kind of visit where the Texans are trying to figure out, all right, this is a guy that maybe he has maturity issues. We want to get a feel for how much growth and improvement he's made on that front. And they're weighing all of those things just to decide whether they're interested in drafting him at all. There's another guy that we're going to talk about later on that the Texans have had on a top 30 visit that I think was probably much more of a, we really like this guy. We'd like to learn a little bit more about him and maybe decide whether he's worth trading up for or taking him at 28, or do we want to wait and see if he falls into the second round? We'll get to him in a little bit. The other other offensive lineman that gets mocked to the Texans a lot is Blake Miller, the offensive tackle. Here's just one of the quotes from Bob McGinn. He'll get thrown down a lot because he's a little light in the hips. He's tough, Not the strongest, but he works at it. Good in pass pro. His thing is he's really, really quick in positions well. After that, just sometimes he's up and down just because he's not super strong or a top athlete. Ideally, he's in the second round, but probably will go one. This is an interesting thing to me because I've got a little bit of PTSD whenever we start talking about offensive tackles who aren't necessarily all that strong and need to learn how to play with lower pad level to be able to withstand the physicality of defensive ends in the NFL. It sounds a lot like guys like Blake Fisher. And I don't know if the Texans right now have an appetite for guys who are athletic but need to gain strength. I mean, like let's not act like an NFL weight room is all that different from big time college football programs these days and their weight rooms and their training tables and all of the resources these guys have available to them. Some guys do get stronger just by virtue of maturation and then continuing to work at it. But I think more times than not, it's a stretch. You know, when a stretched out guy needs to get stronger, that's why it's great to take them in the second round. If they had taken Blake Fisher in the first round, it would have been a much bigger issue than it has been. But he's a guy who's a second round guy that it looks like, hey, maybe over time he'll progress. I just wonder if, given where the Texans are right now, we're like, frankly, in my mindset, and I know most of your guys' mindsets, they don't have a lot of room to make more mistakes in the draft on offensive linemen. Harriante Irisary looks great so far, but we can't have another Kenyon Green, another Blake Fisher, another Juice Scruggs, these guys taken in the first two rounds that you're just kind of hoping they develop or grow into the position. Other than that, there is a lot to like about the kid. It's just there's a little bit of a projection there. Defensive tackles, if we move into those for a little bit, the guys who most often have been mocked to the Texans as of late in the last couple of weeks are interior defensive linemen, and it's Kaden McDonald, the offensive lineman out of Ohio State, and Peter Woods. And did I say offensive lineman? Apologies. Kaden McDonald, the defensive tackle out of Ohio State, and Peter Woods, the defensive tackle out of Clemson. Let's go with Kaden McDonald first. He's been a little bit more often. And scouts love this guy. Just a tough-ass, rugged dude. He shows snatch and power. The run game, he just crushes it. He's not your true pass rusher, not going to give you a lot of sacks, but he's good enough there. He can make a mess in there and push the pocket. He's bottom of the first and will start. And that's interesting because I think Kaden McDonald's a guy that like scouts love him because of the way he plays football, his size, his upside, all of that. They just don't look at him as a true pass rusher. He reminds me a lot of Tim Settle. Massive dude, doesn't test out all that well in the measurables, but he's got some wiggle to him. And I think that he can be more of a presence as a guy that pushes the pocket. Maybe never gets 10 sacks in a season or anything, but can be a presence for you there while you let those guys on the edge really eat. Just push the pocket, force quarterbacks to be either out of the pocket or uncomfortable, and let your edge rushers go to work. And he's won a bunch of academic awards, real seemingly bright and mature guy. And he's been in a top 30 visit for the Texans. And I think I could see them liking him a lot. I know a lot of people say, hey, don't the Texans really want more of a classic 3 technique at defensive tackle? I think for the most part, yes, but I know that they also probably don't love that a lot of times when they really have to anchor down and stop the run, they have to go to a 5 defensive lineman package. They'll play a 5-2, and that's great for stuff in the run, but it kind of leaves you vulnerable in the pass game. If they had more of a true bulky nose tackle in there, they might like that a lot. Just like if you are recruiting for a job position, you're trying to hire somebody, you'd like it a lot if that person is really passionate about coming to work for you. Instead of just looking at a resume and trying to figure out whether it's a fit or not, ZipRecruiter can do this for you. Find candidates who are passionate about coming to work for you. Same way if you're at a team in the NFL, you want recruits who are passionate or draft picks who are passionate about coming to work for you. ZipRecruiter can do that for you. And you can do it now when you go to ZipRecruiter.com/audio. They've got powerful matching technology, and candidates can tell you in their words why they're interested in your job and your job specifically. It's the feature that shows the most interested qualified candidates first, so you meet the right people faster. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. So you can try it free at ZipRecruiter.com/audio. That's ZipRecruiter.com/audio. Meet your match on ZipRecruiter. The other defensive tackle that gets mocked to the Texans a lot is Peter Woods. Now, Peter Woods is more of that 3 technique type of player. He can get upfield. He's more athletic. He's really probably amongst the 5 defensive tackle prospects that are at the top of most big boards. He's the one that's most like a 3 technique, and a lot of the other guys tend to be more like nose tackles. Here, I've got a couple quotes about Peter Woods. First one, you're looking at a high energy guy. He's a fighter. He can play all 3 downs. He can play the edge. He can stack the point. He gets off of blocks. He's shown that he can run to the sideline. He has change of direction and space. But one of the reasons why Clemson didn't have a big year was that there were no impact plays. I don't consider Woods a disruptor. His numbers are journeyman numbers. He's more of a solid defensive tackle, a rotating type of guy. Is he a first rounder for somebody? He could be, but I wouldn't pick him in the first. There's nothing to support that. So that's interesting because I think at least part of what, we had Luke Easterling on last week, and he talked about how Woods had been moved around a lot. It seemed to be like people were a lot higher on him back when he was playing out in the edge. This year they brought him inside more, had him playing nose tackle. And it reminds me in a little bit of a way, kind of like Will Anderson and what he was in college, where Peter Woods isn't the same type of athlete that Will Anderson was, obviously, and Will Anderson had a lot of production. But when they started moving him down inside more, playing more head up on tight ends and offensive tackles his final year at Alabama, the numbers and the production weren't the same. And some people looked at as a check minus for him. People were still very high on Will Anderson. But that's where I think the upside is. And I think classically, for all the reasons that scout just said or other scouts have said, maybe he's a guy that should go in the second round. There's a lot of guys like that on the defensive tackle side of things right now that looks like a guy that somebody might take a swing at late in the first round. And then it just comes down to, okay, the Texans want to be the team that trades out of the first round and then lets one of those other defensive tackles fall to him. We know that Caserio is very much a fan of that strategy. This is the most negative quote about Peter Woods. Gets bounced around a lot at the point of attack and gives you absolutely nothing in pass rush. He was a big-time recruit, and some people still try to hold on to that. He just doesn't do anything. He's just out there. I didn't think he played particularly hard. Some of these guys, at least they play their asses off. That one was just a little bit surprising to me, and I would take that with a grain of salt, probably by the largest extent, because I've seen a lot of people make nice comments about Peter Woods' motor and how he gets after it, and it's more that they're concerned about his production. I think sometimes a lack of production by guys who are talented in college gets interpreted as lack of hustle or lack of motor. Who we saw that from was Jadeveon Clowney. And I can remember reading that about Jadeveon Clowney because remember, he didn't produce as much in his last year before he came to the NFL at South Carolina. And I remember watching and thinking, the kid's got a motor. He just, for one, teams were just getting rid of the ball super fast when Clowney was that much of a guy that had to be accounted for. And he's running sideline to sideline. He's running and catching people downfield. I think the issue with Clowney when he was in Houston was always more about perhaps either practice or rehab or whatever it is that Bill O'Brien didn't like about Clowney. That seemed to be what it was. But I think sometimes when the production doesn't meet people's expectations, the easy thing for them to say is, well, he just doesn't try that hard. He doesn't have a motor. So I would take that anonymous quote from this anonymous scout who may be a guy that gets fired this year. We don't even know if this guy's going to have a job all that long. I would take that with a grain of salt. In terms of another little reminder to take these things with a grain of salt, let's go back a couple years and read what an anonymous scout had said about Kamari Lassiter back then. A 4.64 corner. Remember, he ran a notoriously slow 4.64 40 at his pro day. That's hard to get over. He's one of those guys that knows he can't run, so he just grabs people. He gets downfield. He grabs all the time. More of a number 3 type zone underneath man talent. His 6.62 3-cone at the combine did lead the position. I like him, but that was a disaster, said a third scout. I wouldn't draft him until the 4th or 5th. He's a good player, too. I'll just go die. He's a good player. I'd take him in the third or the fourth. When Sean Pendergast and I talked to Nick Caserio, I think this is when we talked to him at the Combine, I asked him about, 40 times and their relative meaninglessness sometimes. And I asked him whether he got excited when a guy that he likes runs a slow 40. And Nick said, yeah, because there might be some opportunity there. 40 time might scare some people off. And lo and behold, the Texans draft the guy in Kamari Lassiter who looked really fast on film, but just didn't look fast when he was running his 40. And I think that's probably what Nick hopes for is guys like this when they run a slow 40, like a Kamari Lassiter, that some teams will get scared off by that. And Lassiter did grab a lot in college. It was something that he had to work on. And it's one of the things that I was most impressed with by him because I remember watching him his rookie year in camp thinking, oh, boy, this might be a lot of defensive holdings coming up, but he cleaned it up. And obviously he's fast enough to play in the NFL. The other thing that Kamari does to make up for at times when somebody's got him beat by a half step is that he's just got such freakishly good timing on when to get his hand up. I think he does a really good job of reading the eyes of the wide receivers, reading their body language, and he gets that arm bar up there and disrupts a lot of passes that could easily be passes, but he just makes it really difficult. So moving back to the offensive line side of things, since, again, it's mostly offensive linemen and defensive tackles, but Chase Bisontis has been surprisingly polarizing when I talk about him, both on the radio and on my live stream. And I think there's a reason why, but let's read this anonymous quote first. I think this was the only anonymous quote they had for Chase Bisontis. He's very close to Ioane, the guard from Penn State that's likely going to go in the first half of the first round. He's a better athlete than Ioane, moves well, technique sound. Guy gives good effort. Occasionally, he'll play top heavy and get snatched down. Good in pass pro. He can move his feet. Good punch. Gets out in space. Bottom of the first for me. Short arms and hands. Bob McGinn mentioned separately. So this is the second scout says, he's a starter. I had a mental note on him. That was a little bit of a concern. And that's the only thing I've heard about him as far as any kind of a mental note or whatever that might be. So I don't have a clue about that, and I'm just going to ignore it completely. I tend to go with if the Texans like a guy, then so be it. He passes the sniff test for them. He's really good, a third scout said. He's powerful. I think he's a rookie starter, probably second round. He could be the best guard. He's big and nasty. So Bisontis is interesting because – I think one of the things that hurts him when it comes to people who evaluate all the positions, and I think sometimes tend to fall in love with the extreme traits this time of year. They want to see a bunch of pancake blocks. They want to see a guy who's ridiculously athletic in space or whatever it might be. And I don't know if Chase Bisontis really has any of those, but what he is really well-rounded, and I think plays with good technique. There's things he has to clean up, just like all of these offensive linemen have things they need to clean up. But I like him almost because he's well-rounded and he's physical enough, he's tough enough, plays with good technique and pass protection, seems to have a good awareness of how to use his feet. There's times where he needs to, learn how to better pick up games and stunts and all of those things that all rookies do. But I think this might be a reason for some of the gap between some of the people that have been in the business longer versus some of the other people who are independent YouTubers or whatever, who do some really good work, but don't necessarily see anything dazzling about Chase Bisontis. But that's one of the things that I tend to respect in an offensive lineman. Some of the toughest offensive guards that I ever played against were guys who are not remarkable and weren't all pro or anything, but they were just steady as hell. And you felt like in the middle of a game, you might be like, this guy's nothing. And then you realize, I haven't sniffed a tackle today. I haven't done anything because this annoying bastard he's just too steady. The Texans' odds to win the Super Bowl have remained pretty steady from before free agency to afterwards. They're sitting at plus 2,000 right now, right behind the Broncos, right ahead of the Cowboys. There's been some movement at the thereabouts above the Texans. The Rams right now are plus 700 to win the Super Bowl, and they are the favorite. That's despite all of the turmoil going on with Puka Nacua. So you can check that out on FanDuel. Let's hit at least one center because many of you have been clamoring for me to talk more about the centers, and I get it. This is a good year to draft a center. Sometime from the second round on late, there's multiple good prospects, and it's interesting to start to look at body types of these guys. So Sam Hecht from Kansas State is somebody that many people have asked about, and here's what the anonymous scout had to say about Sam Hecht. He's been underweight. He weighs 300, and that's probably a stretch sometimes to stay at 300. Those Iowa centers who were too small and played for 10 years, that's kind of what Sam is. Really a good athlete, stays after it. He's going to get bullied by pass rushers. Dominic Orange of Iowa State just ran over him a couple times, although he did play better against them this year. Mid-round pick. He may have to wait a year to gain some weight. I like Sam as a player, but he's going to be in the right. He's got to be in the right system. He needs a zone team, a scoop team, outside zone, inside zone, that kind of a team, which is interesting because that's not, I don't think, what the Texans want to be. They altered their play calling a bit when Woody Marks became their running back, but I think the core of what they want to do is a whole lot of smash mouth football. In training camp, they were running duo, which is just double teaming the defensive tackles up into the lap of the linebacker all the time, and that's what they wanted to be, and that's the types of offensive linemen they've drafted or signed in free agency. That's the style of player they are. Center's interesting though because it's kind of like being a point guard on a basketball team. The size, in my mind at least, you can throw size out the window a little bit, partly because good centers, as long as they have big physical guards next to them, are ones that do a really good job of feeding people to the guards or working in conjunction with those guys. And you don't necessarily always have to be destroying a guy one-on-one. Likewise, in pass protection, you really don't want your center one-on-one all that often versus defensive tackles anyway, so if you can avoid it. So it's more about sorting things out, being sure that twists and games and stunts and blitzes are picked up. So I wouldn't rule him out. But if the Texans just want sheer beef and mass across the board, Sam Hecht might not be the guy. One news item that I wanted to get into before we part ways today is that apparently Dexter Lawrence, the defensive tackle from the Giants, has requested a trade, and my ears perked right up because he is a stud. Now, is he the type of defensive tackle that D'Amico wants? Because we've talked to people think, oh, he just wants a 3 technique, more athletic, fast guys. Look, Dexter Lawrence pushes the pocket, but he's also just a massive run stuffer who's awesome at what he does. And it's not like he plays head up on the center in a 3-4 old school style or anything. He can play tilted and shaded, and he can go out and play over the guard. And I think that D'Amico is going to be intrigued by a guy like that who would maybe free you up to be a little bit lighter elsewhere. Those times where we mentioned earlier when you have 5 defensive linemen out there to stop the run, Dexter Lawrence equals 2 people. So instead of running a 5-2, you're just running a 4-2, but Dexter Lawrence basically is like having an extra defensive lineman out there. He's that solid. He's that strong. He's that good. I just don't know how much I want to give up for him. And I think right now the Giants are probably looking around at what guys like Quinnen Williams got last year with the Jets. Really, they could just look to the Jets themselves and see that teams are giving up. A team might part with a first-round pick to get Dexter Lawrence. And between paying Will Anderson, Danielle Hunter, and I know, look, Will's contract when he gets an extension won't kick in for a couple of years in terms of the big cap hits, but boy, it's a whole lot of assets you'd have on the defensive line, and yet I'm greedy. I would like to have as many awesome defensive linemen on this team as possible. I know D'Amico feels the same way, and I think this is the kind of news. If D'Amico got a notification that Dexter Lawrence wants to get traded, he was probably at Nick's door as Nick was also seeing either the text or the tweet or whatever Nick does on his burner account. Yeah, these GMs, they all have burner accounts. They all have to, not to post, hopefully, but just to monitor and see things and everything. They don't want to be out there on the interwebs where people can go at him at any given time. So Dexter Lawrence, something to monitor. I'll dig into that because I just saw the news before we started recording here about what teams are looking to possibly give up for him or how much the Giants expect if they even plan on indulging Dexter Lawrence in this trade request. this might just be a little bit of jockeying for a contract or something for all we know. So thank you to FanDuel for sponsoring the Bleav in Texans podcast. Everybody have a great one.